life, I'd been filled with thoughts of inadequacies. Everything I had ever done was neither worth any praise nor so bad that it warranted the thoughts of depression I'd felt my entire life. Yet after so many years of mediocrity, it had eroded my confidence down to a fine grit. I had tried medications and therapy, which helped for a little while, but the thoughts always crept back into my mind. So, when an online email came to me promising to change my life, I paused before checking it off with the rest of the spam that had made it through the filter. I opened it up to see what the sender was selling. Confidential, one-time process. Change your way of thinking. We are testing an experimental procedure and looking for volunteers to try out a breakthrough in the field of mental health. Underneath was an address just a few hours' drive away. What did I have to lose? I drove in silence through the miles of unending pavement and trees. I'd stopped pretending like music did anything to drown out my thoughts. All it did was warp the words into my own personal taunts and accusations. Silence was at least my own thoughts by themselves, no added percussions to turn my self-doubt into a catchy theme song. Pretty soon, I'm sure, I'd be reduced to a husk of a person, smiling to everyone on the outside, while behind the mask fighting the endless barrage of insults only I could hear. I looked at myself in my rearview mirror. My hollow, sunken eyes reflected how I felt inside, just a passenger in a borrowed body. Finally, I pulled into the parking lot of the old building. I could barely see through my fogged windshield. Part of the foundation sank into the ground as if the earth was trying to reclaim the stolen rock. It looked abandoned, covered in ivy and cracks, both wrapping the building like gift wrap made of decay. I thought about turning around. I looked at the address on my phone's cracked screen and compared it to the shadows of the numbers on the building, which had long since fallen off. This was it.
"Are you here for the procedure?" A calm, emotionless voice startled me. She was wearing a black parka and a knit cap pulled low. She hadn't made a sound, as if she had just appeared behind me. "Yeah," I stammered, fiddling with the broken zipper of my thin jacket. It did little to protect me against the harsh gusts of icy air. She tilted her head quizzically, as if studying me, then asked, "What for?" The question caught me off guard. What for?" I repeated. "What are you hoping to get out of it?" she pressed. I hesitated nervously. I don't know. Purpose, maybe? I want to be useful again." She nodded, as if I'd answered correctly. "Dr. Redacted. Carter," she replied confidently as she walked past me. "Follow me." She moved ahead confidently, closing the distance between her and the dilapidated structure. Her boots crunched the packed snow. "Elijah," I said. "Elijah Redacted." I followed. The door strained and groaned as she swung the heavy metal open. She led me down a white, sterile hallway with blinding white fluorescent lights that made me dizzy just looking at them. It was warm inside, like a sudden fever had taken over me. The inside was jarringly different from the outside. One minute the world had been trying to reclaim the building, and the next it was clean and pristine, almost like it had been waiting for me. She opened another door that led to another sterile room. Dr. Carter gestured to the padded recliner in the center of the room. Everything around it was clinical and polished. Again, white walls and more of that fluorescent light. Beside the chair was a small machine on wheels. Lights blinked intermittently next to the monitor. "Please," she said. It sounded professional but rehearsed, like she had said it 1,000 times before. I sat down awkwardly. The vinyl was warm against my back, and somehow I still felt uneasy.
I told myself that it was just because it reminded me of a dentist's office. Maybe this place had been repurposed. There was a faint chemical smell in the air, cleaning supplies, perhaps. She took a seat on the rolling chair, pulled up to the monitor, and began typing. "So, when was the last time you felt like yourself?" she asked, sharply. I hesitated. I don't know how to answer that." "That's okay. Most people don't," she typed and continued. "And do you want to be fixed or be free?" "Fixed," I answered too quickly. "Free? Maybe both?" "Last one," she said, finally stopping to look at me. "Do you believe thoughts can be shared?" I blinked, staring at her piercing blue eyes. "Like telepathically?" I asked. "Not necessarily. Shared, understood, merged, distributed." Her words were strange, yet they made sense. "I think so. I mean, even strangers can think the same things, so maybe not like a signal, but yeah, it's possible." She smiled as if that was the response she had hoped for. She handed me a small elastic headband fitted with wires and metal contact points. "Please put this on," she offered. I slipped it over my head, cold metal beads pressed against my temples. "You're going to sleep now," she explained, her fingers clacking across keys on the computer. "When you wake up, you'll know what to do." She hit a final key, and before I could open my mouth to ask anything else, I felt myself drift off as my vision closed in around me. The world stretched and warped as if it were running away from me. Then, nothing. My eyes opened slowly. It wasn't like I was waking up, but like my consciousness was surfacing from underwater. The first thing I noticed was the light. Patches of smoky, iridescent twilight stretched up to treetops like cathedral pillars. Mist swirled around the moss-covered tree roots. I sat up slowly, my palms sinking into soft soil and rounded stones. It didn't feel cold, although it didn't feel warm either. It was like the sensation had been turned off entirely. The air smelled like moss and wet tree bark. My head felt clear. No voices clamoring to whisper cruel nothings to me or narrate all my past failures on repeat. There was only the sound of the still wind and a slight sway of the trees. In front of me, there was a stone path that cut through the woods, twisting and winding like a path on a game telling you where to go. I guess that's what she meant. Can't really mess up something that's in your face like that. I took a step forward and another. My feet clacked on the stones and crunched the dying leaves underneath. This was one hell of a simulation. I walked down the gently curving path until the air suddenly felt still. The trees glitched. It felt too still, like the forest was suddenly holding its breath. I heard the faint humming, like an old refrigerator. I walked forward on the path, the sound growing louder and more familiar as I went. My steps changed from crunching leaves and clacking stone to cold, hard linoleum. The trees dissolved like ink in water and were replaced by the dark wood of an old kitchen. The air turned sour and stale, and suddenly I was standing in a dim, musky kitchen with a black and white checkered floor. Broken cabinets, either hung from hinges or missing altogether, stuffed with trash or laid bare. The only sign that it had ever been used to store food was a single crushed tin. The refrigerator, which held the scribbled drawings of a child, sat in the corner. I knew just looking at it that it was empty, and the lights were out. My chest tightened. This place had never really left me. As much as I had tried to repress it, this was one of the memories that echoed my self-deprecation every day in those whispers that only I could hear. A small boy, about 10 years old, walked through the door and stared at my feet. I turned around and saw a woman lying on the ground, face up. Her eyes were glassy and her skin pale. A rubber tourniquet was still wrapped around her arm, and the needle was clutched in between her fingers. I remembered this now. "Mommy?" The voice of my younger self cracked. I heard tiny feet shuffle a few steps forward and stop. "Are you sleeping?" Even back then, I knew what had happened. I choked back my emotions and watched as the simulation crackled out and turned to static. My eyes were trained on the stone path of the forest floor. A screen appeared in front of me with two options. In green was accept, and in red was erase. The screen sat there, illuminated in front of my face. The two options slowly pulsed like a heartbeat, inviting me to make my choice. My hand twitched toward accept, reflex, not decision. I paused. This memory had hung over me for years, casting its shadow over my life like a balloon tied to my back, where I couldn't reach the string to let it loose. Now, though, someone had just handed me a pair of scissors. I remembered how her hand clutched that syringe tighter than she had ever held my hand. I remembered how cold the room felt, a chill that had followed me for the rest of my life. I remembered the stillness and the silence that followed my childish question. That silence wrapped itself around my neck like a noose and tightened any time I dared to let anyone else get close to me. That moment taught me that love was fickle and could be traded for a lighter, a baggie, and a spoon. But I also remembered the days she wasn't drowning, when she'd come home from a long day at work and wrap me up in a loving embrace that smelled like cigarettes and cheap perfume. Then she'd tickle me until I was roaring with laughter. I remembered how much she tried before she was taken over by the monsters that walked my streets every night. Those were the monsters I was afraid of the most. If I got rid of this, would I get to keep those good days? Would it just be a blank space left behind that no longer had a name? I tapped erase, and I felt the weight of that memory replaced by nothing. There was no explosion, no flash, just emptiness. In its place, I had continued the rest of my life without a mother. The grief was gone. So was the love. So was she. There was just an empty gray house in that spot, a place no one had ever lived in. I raised my head and turned to continue the path. It went on for several minutes in silence, just the eternal onset of a coming evening and the rustling leaves in the trees. A second glitch. The air grew still again, and as I walked, the cobbled stone turned to hard, flat pavement. The sound of rushing water below me and cars rushing past. The air smelled like exhaust and winter. There she was, Marin. I couldn't believe my eyes as I watched her leaning against the guardrail, typing on her phone. I could almost smell her strawberry perfume. She was wearing that green coat she loved. Her breath was fast as she finished tapping the keys on her phone, tears in her eyes as she finished. I instinctively reached for my pocket and felt the sharp vibration of my old flip phone. I opened the message from her. "I'm sorry I couldn't be enough for you." She climbed onto the bridge, and I ran forward. I knew what happened on this day, but I didn't want to relive it. "No, no!" I screamed. I reached out to grab her hand, but I passed right through her. She turned around, balancing herself with one hand, and paused to take one last look. I saw the sadness in her tear-streaked green eyes. God, how I missed those eyes. My old Honda screeched to a halt. Another me got out of the car. The shock of the car pulling up so abruptly threw her off balance. She had one last look of sadness in her eyes as the simulation froze. I stared up at her, the hurt and confusion imprinted like a statue of my mistakes. She was broken, just like me, and in one of my breakdowns I had let her think the worst of herself. I was never good enough for her, but I loved her too much to let her get away. Instead, I let her love me back. We were both broken. That's what made us hold on so tightly. In the end, it just made it cut that much deeper.
Now, staring at the culmination of that relationship, I saw all of my regret in one still, silent photograph. I had loved her, but I didn't know how to be loved back. The screen appeared again. Accept in green. Erase in red.
My hand didn't move this time. I weighed the options, thinking about this decision. If I chose to erase it, was it mercy for her or for myself? Or was that just the coward's way out? I had held on to this pain and regret for so long. My fingers trembled between the options as I recalled the memories we had shared. I remembered late nights watching cheesy rom-coms, laughing late into the night, and waking up late for work the next day. I remembered the way she would laugh at my jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. I remembered sharing my darkest times with her, her head on my shoulder, and our hands wrapped up together while we shared our tears and let our pasts air out. Secrets we had coveted, now shared between us. I remembered the fights, the times I sat stone silent, shutting her out because I didn't know how to let her in. We were two cracked mirrors trying to see ourselves in each other, cutting ourselves every time we reached out. I stared at her, frozen in time, just like this moment had left me. I wondered if she had ever forgiven me. I hoped she had, but hope was a shape I could no longer hold on to. I pressed erase. The scene glitched, and both Marin and the car vanished. The forest slowly trickled in as the memories fled my mind like a breaking dam. I still remembered I had an ex named Marin, but everything about her was gone now. The smell of her perfume, the way she looked at me, and most of all, her texture, gone. It felt like remembering a dream after you had just woken up. It made sense when it was there, but the details just didn't quite fit anymore. I turned again and continued down the path. I walked for what felt like an eternity. The path stretched on forever through the forest until it came to a sudden end. There was no more path. I stood there at the end of the stones, looking around for what to do. The air was still again, but nothing glitched. Nothing was out of place. It was just the end of the road. I took a step forward, and the forest around me seemed to fade into the background. I reached out and felt the cold tinge of glass against my fingers. I turned and saw another version of me, wearing a thick turtleneck and glasses, sitting in a large chair holding a book with my name on it, titled Struggles of a Broken Mind. "Our pain could have changed lives," he said, tapping a finger on his book. "Instead, we stopped letting our words flow and gave up." Another, in a different mirror, wearing a white lab coat and a stethoscope draped on his neck, a doctor. His coat was pristine and his gaze was sharp and cynical. "Dropping out after just 2 months?" he chided. "We could have been so successful." The glass at my fingertips pulsed with something alive behind it. I turned to it and saw another me smiling with Marin and holding 2 kids, one by the hand and the other cradled in his arm. "If we had just let her love us, this could have been our life," he said with a genuine smile. I looked at the other mirrors, another me on a motorcycle. He looked fulfilled, no hollow eyes or pale skin. He was tanned, toned, and well-traveled. He had escaped the delusions of the voices and outrun the doubts. "We could have been free," he said. "We should have taken that trip and just kept going, ride the waves of life instead of letting them pull us under." I turned and saw myself alone, but this one wasn't like me. He didn't wear a mask, and he didn't look like he ran from his problems. He looked content with his life, regardless of not having had massive success. He had accepted his burdens. "We should have stopped listening to the doubts," he said. His hands were in his pockets. We could have been any one of these, Elijah. I fell to my knees, staring at the blank mirror. The other Elijahs just sat there, silent, their eyes on me, judging or maybe mourning. My reflection appeared in the blank mirror, a pitiful man with a pale face, sunken eyes, and borrowed skin. I crawled closer, and so did he. This was the real me, the origin, the failure. The options appeared in the mirror. Accept, erase. I shuddered, looking at the options. This was no longer memories being cut out like before. This was me. I turned back to the other versions of me, the writer. His eyes sunken like mine, darkened like ink from long, sleepless nights. The doctor, cold, calloused. He looked like he didn't even care for the people he saved, only the results of his work. The family man. He wouldn't even look at me. He simply played with the children he had raised. The wanderer. Healed, but always alone, always on the run from the echoes that still plagued his mind. The healed one. The one I was most envious of. He just stood there, silently watching. He said nothing. He didn't have to. I turned to look at my ghostly reflections staring back at me. I'd walked this road too long and too far. I had spent an entire lifetime in almosts and excuses, drowning under the weight of my grief. I was nothing more than a hollow man wishing for a way out. I was tired of wishing I was someone else, tired of holding on to that regret. My hand hovered over the green accept, and then I pressed erase. The mirrors vanished like smoke, one by one, until I was left staring at myself. My own reflection slowly fades like a whisper of a dream I had once long ago. It was only me now. No more potential, no more possibility, nothing left to compare myself to. I sat there for a while, staring out at the path that stretched out in front of me. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't think there were any more choices to be made, but I guess I was wrong. Finally, I stood, my legs weak as I continued on the path. I don't know how long I walked for. It must have been some eternities. I don't know. I felt like there was no time here anymore. I felt numb to everything. Eventually, through the trees, I saw the path split. I stopped as I reached the end and looked down each short path. One led to a simple metal door with a tiny window that flickered fluorescent light. A sign marked above it read, "Exit." I could hear the soft hum of the bulbs just beyond. The other path led to a strange pond surrounded by strange trees. They seemed both alive and mechanical. Their roots seemed to turn into cables feeding into the edge of the pond. Lights danced across tiny dots that played on the trunks like music notes. I looked back at the door, its promise inviting the way out, back to reality. I took a step to the pond, then another. My body followed the path to the edge of the water, where I knelt and looked into the white waters. It didn't reflect me. The waters were placid and still. I reached down and touched the surface. It felt like static. Dr. Carter's words echoed in my mind. When you wake up, you'll know what to do. I had chosen to erase everything that made me what I was. My pain, my joy, my past. It was all gone now. I stood and looked back at the door again. It was just a few feet away, promising the way out. I wasn't sure I wanted that, though. That door was no longer freedom. It was a humming prison sentence full of new pain and regret. I turned back to the white-watered pond, its unknown promises beckoning me in. I stepped into the static waters, no rippling on the surface at all. It was shallow. I felt a hum that pulsed, something that resonated in my entire being like a pulse. It was like a heartbeat had begun, like a machine had come alive. I stretched my hands into the water and welcomed the full embrace of whatever was to come. I felt the cold static ripple across my skin as I closed my eyes and let out my breath. And then I let go. Dr. Carter descended the lift with me lying on the chair, down past hundreds, thousands of blinking lights. I stared at the shrinking fluorescent lights growing smaller and smaller as we went. Finally, it stopped, and Dr. Carter pulled out a small device. She pressed a button and spoke into it, her voice cold and clinical as always. Subject 9852216, Elijah, redacted, successfully integrated, thought pattern stabilized, depression resolved via cognitive transcendence. She rattled on like a report. She disconnected the wire from the computer that led to my headband and reconnected it to a slot in the wall. Interfacing subject to network, she continued. "Dr. Carter," I muttered, my voice frail. She looked down at me and smiled. "Don't worry, Elijah. You're going to be more useful than you've ever been." She fitted a mask over my face, and I was blind to the outside world. I felt my padded bed slide and heard a door close. The next thing I felt was a thick, viscous liquid covering me all over. I felt a zing of an electrical shock and saw a tiny green light flash in my eyes. Then it turned off and then came back on again. It continued to blink over and over and over again, like a heartbeat that was not my own. I smiled at the blinking light. I was finally useful. I could feel it. So, if you're out there and you get an email about a procedure that can change your life, don't delete it. It might be able to keep its promise. End broadcast. Before you go, I just wanted to take a minute to thank everyone for tuning in to what is our first ever episode of the Null Narrations postcast. And I wanted to thank Reddit user Discord0742 for granting us permission to use their r/nosleep post as content for your listening pleasure. As always, please like and subscribe for more content. And if you have a story or a real-life creepy event you would like to have narrated, please contact us on Reddit at Null Narrations.